Welcome again to the Hats of the 20th Century Museum, Hats and More. And today we're going to start to tackle looking at the vintage clothing that I have had all crammed onto this little rack. So I've spread it out a little bit for us to see better. And I took the hats that were on top of the rack down, other than that one we saw well enough, and thought we could look at them a little better. This one kind of got the bum's rush, so to speak. I had found it in this box, and I don't know what to make of it, other than it kind of looks like something would have maybe been an auto cap, the different hats you saw for autos. And it has an old gathered center lining, but it had very little use, it would appear. And this would seem to be elastic, but it just isn't. So I just don't understand why she's got a strap. Maybe if the wind actually did blow that off. Anyway, nice old hat box. I liked the top of it said hats from Europe. So somebody was pretty lucky got to go to Europe. Okay, and here was another hat that was up there that we didn't look at very closely. But, and it's got an old black lining too. Let's see if we can set her back on. And I got a kick out of finding a picture here. Can you see that very well? Okay. The hat in the middle is just about exactly like that, especially if I took an old plume out of my plumes box and put it across like that. Wouldn't that be something? And the gal who owned it might have done that had she had that plume. Pretty cute. Anyway, that's a wonderful old hat that I'd call a pancake. Then I went past we showed you the Victrola in one of the last videos, and little Nipper, the dog, was sitting there, a stuffed one, because I certainly can't afford one of the antique chalk type statues of him, but I found this in Goodwill, frankly. And it says RCA on the side, and I thought, oh, now wait a minute. He's the Victrola dog, Victrola company down here. It says Victor at the top. I don't really understand that, but he's the little dog that recognized his master's voice. You getting a good picture of that? Okay. Everybody's sort of familiar with that. That's an ad from 1918. Well, why does it say RCA on the side of what is clearly Nipper? Well, then I noticed framed was an ad from 1946. Over in the corner, you're just going to have to trust me. That kind of told the story. I'm going to set it down. There's little Nipper recognizing his master's voice. And it happened in 1898, get it right. And when his master saw that he was actually recognizing his voice, because they recorded their own voices. These were kind of originally called sound machines, or no, the talking machines. The owner was a painter, an artist, so he did a drawing of Nipper and listening to the voice, and went to see if the Victrola company was interested, and they certainly were, used him in their ad. So he became the little symbol for Victrolas. And in 1929, came the radios were wildly popular, a new thing on the market, radios, and the RCA Victor company merged with Victrola. No, RCA company merged with Victrola in 1929. So that's why it is RCA Victor is what we remembered at my age calling it, and that's why he says RCA on the side. Now that took too darn much time, but that was the story of Nipper. Anyway, we all know Nipper now. Okay, so let's rush right over here and see what we can start doing with the earliest clothing at this end. And of course, this is a corset, the kind that were complicated. You had to lace them in a certain way that you could pull from the middle. Here's a kind of a picture of it. I also have, and anybody can get online and Google how to lace a corset properly. And there they are, this gal, holding her foot on the back and pulling as tight as she can to get it really tight. So the girls kind of helped each other. And here are some actual laces for corsets, which you can't run out and buy anymore. 72 inches long. If you think you're going to use shoestrings, you're probably wrong. And then we have mourning veils, which we've touched on. here. I believe I have one really nice one, a big square one. And here I have a kind of beat up, unloved, narrow type. This is a funeral card. Is that too much glare for that?
No, no, it's fine.
All right, there we go. That's a funeral card from 1916. But of course, the mourning veils could be much older than that. That had missed being in the display because I had it hanging with the veils. And when I was showing you display items, I opened a box of old stockings, an old stocking box. I assumed it was empty, but in it I found I had another mourning veil. And this is a narrower one. It's not square. It's only 17 inches long, or deep, you know, and then about 58 wide, if I remember what I measured. Maybe 54. So that might have gone around the brim of a hat instead of going over the whole hat and everything. Alrighty, there, we got to that. What's next? Next are some wonderful capes with this long type of, with the chains and the way of hooking the cape together around your shoulders. This was a couple of, this was a, I'll get it right. Here we go. There, snapped together on the end. And that cape, shawl, whatever you want to call it, scarf, has a nice brown lining and some real pretty needlework, you know, something like a crocheted lace type down into the fringe. This one has got a little bit more colorful lining. It just has a hook that'll hook into whatever part of the chain you want to hold it around your shoulders. But what makes this one really special is the pom-pom balls hanging from it. It's just incredible and in really wonderful shape. And without getting into what I paid for everything, what makes this one really wonderful is I only paid 59 cents for it on a tumble table at the thrift store. That was quite a few years ago when tumble tables for scarves was 59 cents. This is a ruff, and I think you could maybe come a little closer. A ruff is a thing to put around your neck and tie in front. And that's just an example of the catalog page 1902 showing different ruffs. Real silky, pretty thing. People sometimes think you wear it over your head and tie it under your chin, but no, these are called ruffs. And when we were in the corner of the display over there, I showed you, just looking back at it, this beautiful cape with a lot of beading. That's the lining I peeked back to show you. I talked about this chain, but I hadn't really remembered that that's the cape and the chain is another ruff. This one is a feather one. It seems to be ostrich or boa. Marabou, yeah. But if you blow back here, you can find his eyes. Underneath of all of that is an animal that will open his mouth and grab. So the chain we saw, see, you can't even find him, so it's just so useless. But the chain is just a safety chain in case he lost his bite, I suppose. But isn't that marvelous? Old black satin lining. Let's put that on the top edge. Here's another short cape. Now these would have been late 1800s as well as into 1900. This is a marvelous thing that my mother got on a garage sale for $1. The lining isn't anything exciting, just dark satin. But we found out from an old gal at the time, who was nearly 100 years old, that this is monkey fur around the bottom. We couldn't believe it, but now I know full well that it was monkey fur, and they used that a lot. Brittle old stand-up collar, but a beautiful old cape. Here's one that has enough life in it that I've actually worn it over my shoulders to an event that took a costume before. Nothing too fancy, just black, sensible lining. I found one similar to this. It's got a collar that stands up beautifully when you have it on. Kind of makes a little crown or you know, a little queen-looking type stand-up collar. In my 1902 catalog, there's one nearly like it. It's called Crushed Plush, which is exactly what that is, kind of a coarse velvet and upholstery almost, but crushed velvet, not fur. So many times I see in antique stores people think that's fur. And it has a black Tibet fur trim, and Tibet would make me think Mongolian lamb is what we call it now. That's exactly what I'd say that is Mongolian lamb. So back then, that would have been black Tibet fur in the Sears catalog. $3.98 for a long cape. That's terrific. And here's one that's really super to me. This is called a leg of mutton sleeve. And it was very popular at the end of the 1800s. It kind of fell out of popularity pretty fast when you hit 1900 though. But this is my grandmother wearing such a blouse, a different one. And this is her actual blouse. Okay, nothing on the back. And let me tell you, I have a very new sense of respect for these women who had to iron this type of stuff. This was, you know, all crushed and dirty and nearly hopeless looking, but OxiClean brought it back to life, bless it. The hardest part was me trying to do a miserable job of ironing it. You can't get into these sleeves. You can't lay them flat. Oh, well, anyway. It's very disturbing, but I don't know how they did it, but they did it in fabrics that had to be ironed. This, I'm going to lay that right here. This is a tiny little bodice. First, I want you to see how small it is. I mean, that had to be the littlest lady you ever saw in your life. Can you kind of get a glimpse of that, how tiny it is? Of course, there's no sizing. It's just small, let me tell you. Across the shoulders, I had to use a child size hanger. But this is how complicated the clothing was at the beginning of the century and the end of the 1800s. I mean, if that would scare anybody away from wanting to be a seamstress, my land. This is all boning, this brown stuff, to keep it tight, or, you know, rigid and uncomfortable. These are dress shields, which people used right up. They probably still use them now if they're wearing very expensive dresses. But to get into it, goodness sakes, first you've got, once you get it in and put this belt around on the inside around your waist, like that's necessary, then you have to use all these hooks and eyes to get that bit together. And then I believe, we can't really follow the science right here, maybe, yeah. This part must have to go over next and hook onto those. And then the last bit comes over somehow to coordinate with the other row. It's just insane. It is absolutely just insane. And then one last little thing comes over and hooks into that thread loop right there on the hook. Isn't that something? Talk about clothing being miserable. Jeez. Anyway, I'd call that turn of the century for sure, and that they got a little more sensible as we went into the 1900 decade. This is a little child's dress, of course, and such a sad-looking little dingy thing. It made me think of an immigrant or a country kid playing or going off to school. And when I got this book, which I only got a couple weeks or so ago at Goodwill, actually, I did see these little plaid dresses of that era. These immigrant children are wearing plaid, and I guess you see it in, you know, your family photo album and that type of thing. So that's a little frontier kind of dress, I'd say. And here's a sensible dress, like I would say, definitely not anything too fancy, although they've put lace around the cuffs and around the collar. I would guess they were trying to sweeten up an old dress, because it does just look like a house dress. And it is complicated to get into. This front opens up clear over here with snaps, and these all snap together. These people needed zippers. You know what? I was going to look up when zippers started, and I forgot to. But they aren't common until the 30s or 40s probably. And this is just a little, to keep you warm, camisole, muslin camisole. I see them in the catalogs there, but we'll talk about it when we get to the catalog. But that's just something that was in my grandma's trunk. Another kind of sensible blouse. I can't say that there's too much interesting to say about it. Snaps up the front, which kind of gives away the fact that it's this age, and probably something that Grandma used for everyday work. Here's something a little fancier. This is one of the lingerie dresses like I had on the wicker mannequin over there in the beginning. And I have a few of these, and just to show you how serious people were about dressing up, here we have, if you can come over here and get closer, a couple of gals at the beach in their lovely lingerie dresses. See them down there in the foreground with the parasols. Now, isn't that the way you'd want to go to the beach? So there's a lingerie dress, and here's another one. This one's getting a little bit fuller in front, like maybe we're coming to the mono bosom business. I don't know, these collars usually have stays in the back to hold them up. Sometimes stays in the front also to hold them up. So they would go ahead and cough. You cough if you got a cough, all right? Maybe the old clothes are giving you... They can't. They've all been cleaned up. All right, so here's a wonderful... We'll go this far, and then maybe we'll start another video. Here's my oldest coat, and when you have it on, it does tend to have kind of that leg of mutton sleeve look, not so much on the hanger. Beautiful old buttons. That's the way the lining looks, but I want you to see the label. I'll hold that up and bring that down. There. That this coat actually has a label, so it wasn't just something made. It's hard to read, but it says Leeks Fur Manufacturing Company of, I gotta write that now, Gloversville, New York. So that's a wonderful old coat, very heavy, very stiff, but you know, I think it always was. And this is more of the same. We will start in again in a few minutes.